Most people think retirement spending looks like a straight line, right? You take out the same amount every single year, indexed a little bit to inflation, and you just ride it out. That's not how it actually works. Now, we've built hundreds of retirement plans for folks over the years, and we've seen that in real life, it actually looks very different. And thank goodness too, you'll see why in just a sec. The reality is that spending in retirement actually looks a lot more like a staircase where your lifestyle changes over time. Now, as planners, we often segment the retirement journey into three distinct phases: the go-go years, the slow-go years, and then the no-go years. JP Morgan's latest guide to retirement report shows exactly how this spending pattern actually plays out in real life, especially for folks who've saved a decent bit of money for retirement. So in this video, we'll break down the three phases of retirement spending. I'll tell you a little bit about what they are, why they matter, and how understanding them can actually completely change how you plan for your retirement withdrawals. We'll also walk through the numbers and show you how to make sure that your plan accounts for these spending shifts, so that way you don't outlive your money. Let's dive in. Let's talk about this idea of the three phases of retirement spending: the go-go, slow-go, and no-go years. The go-go years are typically, when we're modeling this out, going to be between the ages of 60 and 75. This is where retirement feels like retirement. You're healthy, you're energetic, you've got a long list of things that you've been waiting to do, maybe travel, hobbies, some home upgrades, eating out with friends. This is where most of the big ticket spending is going to happen. According to the data, this phase tends to be the most expensive season for retirees. And it obviously, it makes sense, right? You've just retired, you're eager to enjoy this new season. And that's where the thank goodness moment I mentioned earlier kicks in. Because when we model this phased spending approach, where expenses naturally are going to be declining over time, it often means that you don't actually need quite as much money saved as you might have originally thought. Or put another way, it means that you might be able to spend more in your go-go years without actually jeopardizing your later years. This is a pretty massive mental shift for many retirees. They realize that they can kind of give themselves permission to spend a little bit more early on, knowing that there's going to be natural declines coming later. The slow-go years, we're going to typically model that between the ages of 75 and 85. In that period, things are going to start to slow down a little bit. I mean, you're still active, right? But maybe you just don't feel like taking that 10-hour flight to get out to Europe anymore. Hobbies are going to tend to become a little bit more local, right? Dining out a little bit less frequent, and the pace of life is going to just start to shift a bit. Spending is going to gradually taper off. It's not going to be crazy dramatic, but just noticeable. Interestingly, when we review retirement plans, we often see that clients in this phase start to actually underspend. The plan had them spending X, and we don't even need to look at their spending or their bills to know that it's just not getting spent. We see it piling up in their bank accounts. More coming on that in just a sec. There's just more coming in than is being put to use. Now, the no-go years are going to start from age 85 and go beyond. At this point, most of the discretionary spending is gone. Travel and entertainment, they're kind of taking a back seat at this point, and spending is going to start to shift towards healthcare and more of those essential needs. Long-term care costs might creep in, and one surprising category that tends to increase in these later years, statistically at least, is actually charitable giving. Many retirees feel a stronger desire to give back during this phase, whether it's supporting causes that they care about or maybe passing down a legacy of their own. But here's the problem. This framework, go-go, slow-go, no-go, it's helpful, but it is not perfect. Spending doesn't naturally drop off at 75, as though it just is like some magic miracle, or suddenly spike at 85. Life isn't that neat. The reality is that spending often fluctuates significantly from year to year, even within these phases. In fact, that JP Morgan Guide to Retirement report showed that 60% of retirees experience what they call spending volatility of about 20% or more in the first 3 years of retirement. And even later, 52% of retirees between the ages of 75 and 80 still see year-to-year spending fluctuations. And that means that even after the go-go years, your spending might still actually be higher in some years, maybe lower in other years, and that volatility can introduce something that's called sequence of returns risk. We'll get to that a bit later. So here's the bottom line, right? Retirement spending is actually dynamic. A static plan, right, a straight line up and to the right, doesn't actually reflect the reality of how life and typically your spending actually changes over time. You need a flexible plan that's going to adapt to these different phases for sure, and it's going to kind of account for those inevitable fluctuations. And to be clear, like this matters, right? Because when you just withdraw the same amount every year indexed to inflation, you end up with a few glaring blind spots. On the one hand, if you're in the go-go years and a big market downturn hits, while you're pulling money out for travel and experiences, that can put some serious pressure on your portfolio early in retirement. But on the flip side, if you underspend in your slow-go years, you risk leaving behind a giant pile of money that you never got to enjoy. And by the time you hit the no-go years, it's just too late to go back and take that extra trip or spend that extra time with your loved ones. So clearly the right answer is a spending plan that's going to be flexible enough to adapt to life and whatever's going on in the world at that time. By the way, if we haven't ever met, my name is Steve Willems. I'm a practicing certified financial planner and wealth advisor with the Willems Wealth Planning Group out here in BC. We started this channel to help you plan for your own retirement, helping you think about how to plan and arrange your investments, your income streams, and ideally pay less tax along the way. All right, so we've established that retirement spending doesn't move in a straight line. It ebbs and flows through different phases. But here's where it gets really interesting. It's not actually about how you're spending, but where that money is going. Again, I've referred to that Guide to Retirement report from JP Morgan. It breaks down how the composition of spending actually shifts over time as you go through retirement. So here's what happens as you move through those three phases. Now, housing is typically going to be the biggest expense for most retirees. And while that does stay relatively steady as a percentage of spending, that doesn't actually tell the whole story. If you downsize in your 70s or maybe pay off your mortgage earlier, obviously that can reduce your fixed costs. But property taxes, maintenance, insurance, they can obviously continue to creep up even after the mortgage is gone. So just a tip, if your plan assumes housing costs are going to kind of vanish after the mortgage is paid off, that's going to be a mistake. Just make sure that you're factoring in the ongoing costs that are going to be sticking around after that mortgage is gone. Because even with a paid off home, we've built out some plans for folks who've had really, really significant 4-figure per month strata bills as they transition through different forms of housing. Now in the go-go years, travel and entertainment, discretionary spending, they're going to be at their peak. This is when retirees typically splurge on experiences, bucket list trips, hobbies, all that kind of thing. But by the slow-go years, these categories are going to start declining by, on average, about 20 to 30%. Now, it's not an overnight drop, right? Spending is going to taper off gradually as kind of interest and energy kind of starts to wane. Now, most plans are going to assume kind of like a sudden drop at 75, but in real life, the decline is obviously going to be much more gradual than what we're seeing here. Now, as you move into the no-go years, healthcare costs are going to rise, and they don't go up by just a little bit. Healthcare spending as a percentage of your budget more than doubles from the go-go to the no-go years, going from about 6.9% of average annual spending up to about 16% for those age 75 and older. And if long-term care is going to be entering into the picture for you, costs can spike dramatically. So keep in mind that healthcare inflation, it tends to outpace general inflation. Over here, we see that the historical inflation rate for healthcare expense is about 4.5%, while the overall inflation rate for this exact same time period was about 2.9%. So that difference between those inflation rates is meaningful. Now, one other takeaway from this graph is perhaps one of the most overlooked trends. Many retirees increase their charitable giving later in life. So as discretionary spending declines, many are going to shift their focus towards legacy and making a meaningful impact. So you can kind of see here how this blue area increases significantly as folks age. And you might think oh, well, that's just something wealthier folks do, right? This is looking at retirees with between $1 to $3 million of liquid savings after all, right? False. Here's the same data, but for folks who have saved between $250,000 to $750,000 liquid for retirement. Obviously, the total donated dollars are in fact lower, but we see the same trend here as we do with wealthier folks. So the tip here is just that if philanthropy is going to be a part of your plan, consider strategies like donating appreciated securities, or maybe setting up a donor advised fund just to make sure that you're maximizing the tax efficiency of your giving. Now, I've done a video on that in the past. I'll put a link to that up here. All right, so we know that retirement spending, it's going to change over time, and we've seen how the composition of spending is also going to change through that go-go, the slow-go, and the no-go years. But here's the thing. If your retirement plan is built on a static spending model, it's probably wrong. Now, most traditional retirement plans are going to assume you're going to withdraw a targeted amount, maybe adjusting for inflation along the way, but based on your spending needs today, adjusted all the way out until the end of your life. But this approach ignores this natural ebb and flow of spending as it happens in real life. And that's where a dynamic spending plan can make a lot of difference for you. Now, a dynamic plan is going to adapt to real life. You can spend more in your go-go years. You can pull back slightly if the markets take a hit. And you can have more left over when the healthcare costs are going to start climbing in your 80s and beyond. It's about being flexible, not really rigid. So how does this work in real life? So essentially, you're going to think about your retirement spending dynamically. You need to take into account a few things. Now, first, just noticing the difference between essential and discretionary spending. So you're going to obviously be maintaining your essential expenses, but you're going to elect to be flexible with your discretionary spending, specifically during market downturns, whenever those should arise. And then second, you'll be willing to slightly reduce those discretionary withdrawals in bad years for the trade-off of modestly increased spending in good years. You're kind of smoothing out the impact of that volatility. And third, like doing this and baking that into the go-go, the slow-go, and the no-go kind of gradual reduction of discretionary spending over time, you're actually going to end up preserving a larger balance of savings for when you actually need it, perhaps in your late 80s or your early 90s, to cover those increased healthcare and maybe those potential long-term care costs without cutting it too close. So here's the takeaway. Retirement spending, it doesn't actually move in a straight line, and your plan shouldn't either. A dynamic spending plan, it's going to acknowledge that life is unpredictable. It allows you to enjoy more in your go-go years while safeguarding your long-term security when healthcare costs are going to be ramping up later on in the no-go years. So here's what I'd suggest. If you're planning to retire soon, go reach into the filing cabinet back in your office and see how you modeled it out the last time you ran your numbers. If you've been running your plan based on kind of that static withdrawal model, it might be time to rethink that approach. If you're not sure if your current plan accounts for these like real life spending patterns, we'd be happy to take a look. Again, we've built hundreds of these over the years. I'll put a link in the description below for us to have a quick chat to vet your plan. Otherwise, that's all for now. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.